Absolutely fine. Yeah.
All right, great. I usually I do my podcast at night, so it's a little unorthodox of me to do it during the morning time. So I have my cup of coffee ready. So we're ready to go. We're recording. The best thing about pre-recorded interviews is that we can make as many mistakes as we like because I can always edit later.
Sure. Okay.
Right. So we're not live. So I'm used to doing live shows, and this is great. Again, we have Mr. Robin Foy on the Strange Oddities Podcast. I'm really excited. He's a renowned medium and spiritualist. He is the founder of the Scole Experiment, or one of the founders originally, that took place in Scole, England. And he does other things other than the Scole Experiment. He's still quite involved in the paranormal, I believe. And, I'm excited to have him. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, great. I don't know where to start. We have so much to talk about. I mean, it's just, this all started in the 90s. I guess we could just kind of talk about the Scole Experiment a little bit, and we can, get into what you're working on now. How did you first get started with the people you worked with? How did the Scole really begin?
Well, Sandra and I had been involved for a lot longer than Scole.
Right.
We both got involved round about, it must have been 1973 in my case, and Sandra, I think, probably about 1975. And it all started with me joining a circle in Leicester in the UK, which was a physical circle. And at that time, I knew very little about all of this stuff, and I was very much in the learning stage. And it was quite unusual in those days, well, still is, in fact, to walk straight into a circle that happens to be a physical circle. Mm-hmm. There's not too many of them around.
No.
So, I sort of answered an ad in a local newspaper in Leicester that asked for anyone that was interested in psychic research to get in touch. And when I wrote back to the guy, he said, yeah, sort of come along and be interviewed. And he had he'd been running physical circles for a number of years. It's a chap called Elmer Brown. I think he was originally American, but he was running a shop selling curtains in the UK near Leicester. And we went along to sort of to meet him. And there were about half a dozen other people who'd answered the advert, who he'd said, yeah, come along and see me. And he explained all about physical phenomena and the very fact that anything that was involved in physical phenomena was something that everyone present could see, mm-hmm. everyone present could hear, everyone could sort of be involved in physically. So in other words, you could feel touches if you were allowed to, you could see things that were lit up for you. And he sort of said, well, if you're interested in this, and in fact, I'd been interested in the subject for many years, but never really got into it. I've never really been a spiritualist. Everybody assumes that we are,
right.
Whereas in fact, really we're psychic researchers and more on the scientific side than on the religious side.
Mm.
So when we were here at this guy's house, he explained exactly what the circle was doing. They sat, and there was about 12 of them in the circle. And he said, would you like to sort of see the room we sit in? And we all said yes. Well, his house was situated about 200 yards away from a house on either side. He had a field at the back. He had about 300 yards of his front garden up to the road. So there was nobody else in the immediate vicinity of the house. I think he'd already said that about 2 of them were not suitable for his circle. But 4 of us went upstairs to have a look at this room that he was using. And as we walked up the stairs, all 4 of us heard a baby crying in midair. Obviously, the first thought was, well, you've got a baby in the house. And he sort of said, no, we haven't. And nevertheless, we had heard it. And he said, well, maybe one of you, it's a message for one of you from spirit.
Oh,
So we said, oh, well, maybe, And we had a look at the room, and it's a very bare room that they sat in, with chairs sort of right against the wall, so that there was nothing could get behind anybody there.
right.
Very old gramophone he had in there, and which he used to play records and sort of get a little bit of singing going. But anyway, went home after this, and I decided that I was going to join this circle. A week later, my first wife and I, who had applied to adopt, actually got a telephone call. And a lady on the other end said, yeah, you applied to adopt. We've got a baby for you. And this was a message from Spirit for me. Well, of course, that grabbed me straight away. And there were so many things happened in that circle. I sat there for about 2 years. And the very first time I sat there, it was in the dark, and I had a materialized finger poke me in the back. Well, nobody could get behind me, so I knew that it wasn't anybody that was there. It was Spirit. And we used to get little bits and pieces of phenomena there. But the big point for me was that about 3 months into sitting in that circle, this chap, Elmer Brown, actually had been a good friend of a very, very famous physical medium called Leslie Flint. Leslie Flint was a voice medium, so that he got independent voices, in other words, voices that came from midair, talking to anybody present there. And we were taken along to Leslie's about 3 months after I'd joined this circle for a sitting with Leslie. And it was interesting because Leslie just sat there in the dark and chatted to us. And then about 10 minutes into the sitting, a spirit voice came through, and that was Mickey, his guide, a young lad that had been killed around about 1912, I think it had happened to him. And this was Leslie's guide. And he was quite a character. But during that first sitting, which lasted about 2 to 2.5 hours, we probably had 10 to 15 spirit people came and talked to us. Some of them for anything up to 15 minutes. The voices were loud, they were clear, they came out of midair. And also Leslie Flint himself was talking to us at the same time and sometimes joining in the conversation.
Wow.
So I walked out of there and I was hooked. Physical mediumship, physical phenomena, that's what I needed to do. And I reckoned that I'd probably spend the rest of my life getting involved in that. And that's really what we've done.
Right.
So that was 1973. And an awful lot's happened since then. Wow. I got married to Sandra in 1979. She had been drawn into a circle in Romford in Essex in the UK that I'd started a couple of years previously, but then left. And so she came straight into it in that way as well. And she'd also had the same experience where she'd not been involved in what we call mental mediumship, which involves clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, where it's all happening in a lit room and only the medium is able to see, hear, etc., the spirit person that's speaking, and then they pass on the message.
Wow.
With physical, the message is happening at the time and everybody hears it.
Right. So what kind of chose the location for the beginnings of the Scole Experiment? Like, did they have a particular reason that they chose that? Do you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we sort of got around us a spirit team.
Right.
Very, very early on, we went to live first and foremost in Norfolk in the UK, in an old vicarage, sort of been a vicarage, belonged to the Church of England, and we went there because we decided that we had to move there. And Sandra was very, very clairvoyant and was getting messages that we had to move to Norfolk. So we moved there. And then 2 years after we'd been in this rectory, we had to leave because the church wanted it back for another vicar. And around about the same time, Sandra saw a notice in the paper, local paper, that said farmhouse to let. And that's how it started. And we decided that we had to move. We'd look at this farmhouse, and we went along for an interview, and the guy there actually was Sir Rupert Mann. He owned about 90 houses in his whole empire, and he said, yeah, we could have the house, but first and foremost, he had to interview us before he'd allow us to even see the house. He wouldn't tell us where the house was.
Mm-hmm.
And funnily enough, for several years, we'd been sort of taking weekends away and starting to look for our own roots, sort of with our ancestors. And in doing that, we'd stayed many times in Norfolk. And one of the places we stayed and enjoyed was a place called the Scole Inn, which was a very old inn that was built in 1666, same year as the Great Fire of London. And we'd stayed in a bedroom in this hotel where Sandra had looked out of the room to the house that was sitting next door, which was a sizable house. And she'd actually made the comment, oh, I'd love to live in this sort of area and maybe in a house like that one next door.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, this guy wouldn't tell us where the house was until he'd interviewed us. And then we were allowed to go and see it. And you can imagine our surprise when it turned out to be the actual house next to the Scole Inn that Sandra had admired several sort of years before. And so that was the place.
Right.
We got it at a reasonable rent because it was in a dreadful state, sort of with the furnishings, etc. So we got, it was exactly what we wanted, but it had 2 cellars. And it was a little bit higher than the rest of the village. So if the rest of the village flooded, you wouldn't get flooding in the cellars. But of course, the cellars were exactly what we wanted for a circle.
Yeah.
And at that time, when we first moved in there, I had also started an organization called the Noah's Ark Society, which Spirit had asked me to do in 1990 because they wanted an organization that would save physical mediumship and its phenomena, which at the time looked as though it was going to disappear completely. All the old physical mediums were dying off. There were very, very few young physical mediums wanting to and starting to develop.
Right.
So it was down to us basically to try and interest people all over the world in physical mediumship and get it going again, which we did very, very successfully in the Noah's Ark Society. And we had people all over the world who were coming to us for advice. How do I get a circle started? What can we expect? And we helped them out wherever we could. But through the society, through the Noah's Ark Society, we found 2 brand new physical mediums who were really wonderful and developed very, very quickly. And they were able to demonstrate to the public. So I think in 1991, when we had our first seminar in a hotel in Leicester with 100 people present.
Wow.
One of these 2 physical mediums, a chap called Colin Fry, was able to demonstrate to the 100 people there physical mediumship. And that was very, very successful. And the other chap, Stuart Alexander, who'd been a physical medium for many years himself, when he'd witnessed that first demonstration, said, well, actually, I'm a physical medium too, and I feel that perhaps I should also demonstrate to the public. So that's what he did from then on. And not long after that, of course, when we got into Street Farmhouse, which was in 1991, we renovated one of the cellars so it could be used by the Noah's Ark Society for demonstrations of physical mediumship. And of course, at the same time, we started to look out for people because for many years, Sandra and I had run physical circles ourselves in the different places we'd lived, and some of them very successful. We had some amazing phenomena with teleportation in the early years, I think probably around about 1980 when we first married.
Wow.
We were living in a house in a place called Harold Wood, which is just outside London. And we had our circle there. And on one occasion, one of our daughters actually had a cage with a hamster in it that was sitting on one of the kitchen surfaces. And when we came down from the sitting, the hamster had disappeared. The cage was still locked, but the hamster had disappeared.
That's crazy.
This was really, we're all on our hands and knees trying to find this blinking hamster. In the end, Sandra got so frustrated that she went into the kitchen and said, "Look, Spirit, if this is you and you've taken the hamster, bring him back." And as she stood there in the fully lighted kitchen, gradually she saw a ball of light on one of the kitchen surfaces that was very, very, it was vibrating very, very fast. And as the vibrations died down, into view out of this ball of light came the hamster.
Oh my God!
Not at all hurt or what have you.
Yeah.
But if the sort of allusion really is probably to Star Trek. When you saw the Star Trek series, they stand on a plinth and sort of beam me up and so forth.
Yeah,
And that's really exactly
beam
what
up
was
the
happening
hamster.
to the hamster.
Yeah, beam
But
it.
it was also demonstrating to us how in the future they would be able to bring spirit people into our room by beaming them in.
Wow.
And of course, when we had the experiments at Scole and we got solid spirit people being beamed into the room, it was done in a totally different way from the traditional forms of physical mediumship, where materializations had happened using the substance ectoplasm. And that was the only traditional way that people within spiritualism understood.
Right.
But we had been told in the circle at just outside London, as we were both in that circle, we developed independent voice in that circle. And one of the guides came to us and said, in the future, you will be able to get physical mediumship and phenomena using only energy and not ectoplasm. And we really didn't sort of think much about it at the time. It was a passing remark. But when we got to Scole, that's exactly what was happening. And Spirit were using an entirely different way to bring people into the room and to produce the phenomena.
Right. I think I'm glad you brought up ectoplasm, because there's I think a ton of confusion on our side of the world, because I just want to just go right out saying that I think a lot of what you guys do are far more advanced as far as the studies that you guys do in person compared to some of the things, I'm not putting anybody down on our side of the world either, but I'm just saying as far as, how far you guys have come with physical phenomenon and how you guys approach things and everything. But as far as ectoplasm, there's a lot of confusion as to what ectoplasm is. And, some people think, it's just like stuff that drips down the wall, or it's like a physical kind of residue kind of thing. Or can you explain a little bit what like from your perspective, what ectoplasm is?
Yeah, I mean, I've witnessed a lot of ectoplasm over the years,
right?
And basically, it does look rather like sort of a cotton wool type of product, but it's actually created inside one physical medium who's virtually always in deep trance. Now, in the new way that we've been working, deep trance isn't always necessary, but where ectoplasm is involved, that has to be the case. Some of it's a whole load of chemicals inside the medium's body, and that's added to by certain spiritual and chemical things that are inside the sitters that are added to the mix, if you like. And it is exuded from one or all of the medium's orifices. So that's ears, nose, mouth, in rectum. And basically, it flows out of the medium when the medium is pretty well developed and sort of quite advanced. It flows out of that medium, out of the mouth, generally the ears also. When you see it, and it is like a living substance, because it's these clouds of ectoplasm are sort of throbbing, or that you've got the feeling that they're alive. It's sort of throbbing and moving all the time. And I've seen it gather on the floor, and then a spirit hand come up from the floor and wave to everybody that was there. There is one fantastic medium in the world who is producing marvelous ectoplasmic full materialized figures, and that's a German medium called Kai Muger.
Mm.
Guy's a very, very good friend, and he is probably the best demonstrating medium in the world at the moment who's demonstrating ectoplasmic phenomena. So that's exactly what happens, but it is also very dangerous for any medium that is working with ectoplasm. They're in a deep trance, so they're not always aware of what's going on. And if somebody does something stupid in the room at the time, like put on a light, like try and grab a materialization, then that ectoplasm can shoot back into the body of the medium and cause really irreparable damage. And in
Right.
some cases, it's caused death within physical mediums.
Really? Wow.
A very famous physical medium called Helen Duncan, who was a materialization medium, was killed in that way. There was a police raid on one of her seances in Nottingham in the UK, and as it happened, she really collapsed totally. The ectoplasm shot back into her body. Within 3 weeks, she was dead.
Wow.
Because it had caused her irreparable damage.
Wow.
So working with ectoplasm is actually quite dangerous,
Yeah.
and not something that I would recommend with mediums today.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that our spirit team said to us, look, encourage people to sit so they can develop physical mediumship and phenomena using only energy. First and foremost, it's quicker to develop. If you're trying to develop physical mediumship using ectoplasm, in the past, it can take anything up to 18 years from scratch to develop it properly. And it's also limited to a certain extent in some of the phenomena that can be created using ectoplasm. Whereas if you're working with energy, it can develop within months rather than years. And there is no limit to what can be created by spirit using energy, whereas there are limits to the ectoplasmic phenomena.
Right. I was actually going to say, what was your thoughts as to why it's so rare that we see physical mediums nowadays that, try to attempt using ectoplasm as their, for their skill. But now I can completely understand why, as to it's a rare thing to see a physical medium to try to attempt, using ectoplasm, like you said, the dangers that are involved, and it takes years and years of work and research to really attempt a good, to attempt ectoplasm.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I have some other questions regarding the Scole. I'm going to look at my list of questions here. The team member, Miss Emily Bradshaw from SPR, Society of Physical Research, sitting in during your experiment, and also sitting in was Rupert Sheldrake.
Emily Bradshaw was actually one of the main spirit speakers, one of our main workers in the spirit team. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What was that like?
That was absolutely fantastic. I mean, you can imagine it was a 5-year period that we had with the Scole Experiment. And over that time, we had at least 2 sittings every week. So there was at least 1,000 hours over 5 years of all the phenomena and the sittings that we had during the Scole Experiment. Emily Bradshaw was really, well, she was like a surrogate mum to us, to be honest. She was fantastic with regard to producing evidential sort of messages that nobody would have known about, and really had to research to discover that they were 100%. But she was really marvelous in producing the evidence that we got during the Scole Experiment. And that was amazing. And quite honestly, we still run our own group. Emily Bradshaw was not her correct name at the time. She told us that she'd used a pseudonym because a lot of her family members were still alive, and probably wouldn't have approved of the way that she was working with us. But Emily Bradshaw, as she was, is still working with us, but under her real name.
Oh, wow. That's great. Um, okay. I got like a whole I have a list like this
Yeah,
as far as questions go.
we might
But
have to make it 2 interviews.
yeah, right. I would love to have you on again. I mean, again, we can only cram in so much in so little time, and it's really hard to schedule. Just so everybody knows, Mr. Foy is over in Spain, so it's really hard to schedule interviews when they're like 5 hours ahead of our time, and like again, it's rare for me to be able to do an interview at this time in the morning, which I'm just really grateful that you can even be a part of being on the podcast. So I'm so grateful for your presence on the show.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. All right. So what about your experiences with Marcello Bacci, if I pronounce the names correctly?
Yeah,
And your
Marcello Bacci, we first met him after the Scole experiment had finished.
mhm.
And I hadn't really heard of his work at the time. But one afternoon, Sandra was doing night work and she was still in bed. I had a feeling I had to get home early. And when I got home, there was a group of about 8 people standing in our driveway there in Scole, about to knock on the door. And this turned out to be Marcello Bacci, his wife Marina, and 6 of the sitters in his circle.
Mm,
And they'd come, to just on the off chance they hadn't rung up or anything, to meet us. And so I sort of said to them, well, look, I'll take you to the Scole Inn next door for a drink, and then we can sort of all chat, which we did. And quite interestingly, one of the things that Batch's circle had been getting were apports, that's little presents of glass animals and glass objects that had sort of fallen onto the table, etc., and appeared during their sittings.
mm,
And while we were in the inn next door, without any of the people present touching me, 2 of these little glass apports appeared in my pockets. So they just came from nowhere in a fully lit conditions in the Scole Inn. And
wow.
so we had a chat anyway. And over the years, I was invited and Sandra was invited to go to Italy to meet Marcello and his wife.
Hmm.
We did that. And I think in all, we probably went over 3 or 4 times and witnessed him using his very, very old radio, which was an old valve radio that he used. And he was able to get spirit voices speaking through this radio. And during the times that we were able to observe his work, we heard an awful lot of this, and we also saw some of his friends and scientists who worked with him on occasion actually take the valves out of the radio whilst it was working, whilst the spirit voices were speaking, and they still continued to speak.
Mm.
So that was quite amazing. Poor old
Yeah.
Marcello's passed now. I think he died earlier this year.
Oh,
But it was really quite something, and I'd never come across a situation before where
right.
somebody was able to get recognizable voices through an old radio. And he had a sort of laboratory in Grosseto in
Right.
Italy, where a lot of old ladies who'd lost children
Hmm.
came to visit, hoping that they might hear their children.
Hmm.
And many of them did actually recognize the voice of their children,
Oh,
saying a few words to them. And
yeah.
they were delighted about that. They came
Wow.
from all over Italy to sit in his seances.
Wow. Now, as far as radio voices go, what's your personal views on radio voices compared to like your own abilities and your own skill and stuff? Like, what's your thoughts on technology and how those spirits can communicate through direct radio voices and that technology? I think it's fantastic how when you ask a question or you're trying to use that energy and the intent you have with trying to communicate with spirit through that technology, the responses are just like, I don't even know where to start with that. It's just like things you can't fathom as far as today's science. Like like you can explain some of it, but some of it you can't.
Yeah, absolutely so. I mean, I have to say, I'm not a technical person. I've sort of
Right.
grown a long time ago.
Right.
I'm on my last lap now, but sort of during those years, I've gathered a fair amount of knowledge about these different methods of communication.
Yeah.
Direct radio voices, yes, I find it very interesting, and there are still people today who are trying to develop that type of phenomena. I first came across, well, the first thing I came across with regard to this type of communication was EVP.
Mm-hmm.
And that started when I was sitting in Elmer Brown's circle way back in 1973. Elmer Brown had been fascinated by this. In those days, it was called rowdy voices,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the new electronic voice phenomenon. And he used to sit up, sort of all the night sometimes, trying to sort of get a number of these messages. And all he would do is play a cassette tape recorder and be recording, and then he'd play it back and see how often he got voices on there. Well, I personally was fascinated by this at the time. I was doing an extra job at that time of my life and was actually navigating locum doctors that are around Birmingham in the UK. And so whilst they were actually in with a patient, I was listening to the radio, and so I had a bit of sort of back noise going on, and I would record myself. And I developed the ability to be able to get these EVP voices.
Mm-hmm.
And I once, just for a bit of a joke, really, I had a bit of a competition with Elmer Brown himself. We both recorded for 15 minutes and
Wow.
to see who could get the most EVP messages in that time. And I think I'd got to the stage where I was getting about 100 in 15 minutes.
Holy
And I
cow.
think he just topped me. I think he got about 120. But it was quite amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, our own technology really went forward when we had this communication from Thomas Edison, and he asked us to build this TDC, trans-dimensional communication device.
Nice.
And we actually, the very first message when we finally got that working at Scole came from him himself, a 15-minute message with Thomas speaking to us.
That's amazing. Yeah, really amazing. That's actually one of my questions. When you guys use sealed film during your experiments, and
Yeah.
I believe Thomas Edison was one of the images I think that you got through your sealed film. What was that like?
Well, I mean, that was fantastic. I mean, what he actually did, Thomas Edison at that time, was to give us a blueprint of the little device he wanted us to build. We'd
Right.
already tried to build one, which had not been too successful, and he sort of corrected it on film and gave us a blueprint on film,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was written on the film as well. If you build it this way, you'll get the results.
Yeah.
And by golly, we did. And
Yeah.
not only, I mean, he was the very first voice to speak to us, but eventually we were actually getting audio communications with other dimensions. In other words, ETs.
Wow. What was your feelings on that when you were kind of, as far as your beliefs in other life outside of our universe, when you were getting that kind of communication? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, we were chuffed.
Yeah.
I mean, we really were so excited at the prospect of this happening. And I mean, we did have sittings at Scole where we had a miniature UFO actually flying around the room.
Wow.
And not only that, but we actually had an ET who had been able to put his face on film, who we called Blue because he was blue in color, who came and stood in front of us, picked up our hands, put them on his head so that you could feel he wasn't human. And, I mean, he was the most loving little guy we'd ever come across.
Nice.
So we were delighted. And I mean, it was a great move forwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So we're talking with Mr. Robin Foy. He's a renowned medium and spiritualist. They worked with the Scole Experiment. He's one of the founders of the Scole Experiment. What books would you recommend people to read? I know there's quite a few books out there regarding direct radio voices and the Scole Experiment. I know you guys have your own report available and things like that. What kind of books and information can people look up and get into?
Well, there are a whole load of them, but
Yeah.
I would recommend to anyone, first and foremost, a book called Voices in the Dark,
Hmm.
which is an autobiography of Leslie Flint. It's a fantastic book. He was a fantastic medium, and we were privileged to go to his funeral in 1994.
Right.
But we had 25 sittings over the years with Leslie Flint, and we spoke to the most fantastic people in spirit.
Right.
Many of whom will be known to everybody, including quite a few ex-American presidents, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We had a lot of help over the years from somebody who's become a friend in spirit, and that's Winston Churchill.
Oh yeah, that's a great name. Great person, right? Yeah. That's crazy. But what I do want to say is, like, over here, we do things, I guess, unorthodox. We try to think outside the box with some of the things that we do in the paranormal. There's a lot of people that put down, direct radio voices and ITC and EVP. They think they're, radio transmission, pareidolia. There's all different types of things that people try to explain things. But like, to me, when you get a phenomena that you can't scientifically explain, like, to me, that's something. It's like, like, it's something. How do you dismiss those things? Like, what was it like for you guys to review some of the phenomena you got? What was some of the approach and some of the methods that you applied to kind of study all the things that you've, if you want to combine all those things in your review, what was your approach?
Well, I mean, we checked out all the leads, and the thing was that we were basically 4 people. Originally, the Scole group started out as 7 people. We got some very good phenomena within the first year, but then through natural wastage, 3 people left, and we had 4 people as the main core of the group. And all of us, whatever we were getting, would try and research every bit of information that was being given to us by the spirit team.
Mm-hmm.
They tried very hard sometimes to explain things we didn't understand. And that's when, on occasions, we had scientists that came over there to sit with us and to study the whole of the events on there. 3 senior members of the SPR sat with us over a 2-year period. And they came out more or less in favor in the Scole report, more or less in favor of everything they had seen being genuine. And the only other way, you could either accept it as being genuine, or you could immediately go out and say, oh, it's fraudulent.
Right.
But the crazy thing about that was that the people who said it was fraudulent had never tried it, had never actually witnessed it, and never made any effort to do it themselves. So really, I mean, it's a lot of that was trying to make a name for themselves. If we prove that it's fraudulent, we'll be somebody great. But all in all, there's no explanation other than the fact that this was spirit trying to work through us, trying to get more people in the world interested in physical mediumship, physical phenomena, and in developing it. And that's exactly what's happening now. We have a new organization now, which is called the Spiritual Science Foundation.
Nice.
And we're working towards actually buying a property. We were told about it way back I think we came over here in 2006. We were told about this property in 2007. We weren't told exactly where it was going to be in Spain, but it was going to be in Spain. We were given 25 clues. When we worked it out, there was only one place in the whole of Spain it could be where they'd had sort of UFOs, etc. And that was a place called Antequera in the south of Spain. And that's where we're wanting to move next year. We've sort of been trying to fund the buying of this property, and it's absolutely perfect for us. So we're hoping that's all going to come off next year. But we have members all over the year. all over the world rather, that are interested in physical mediumship and in developing it. And we're doing our very best to help them develop their physical mediumship, giving advice, etc. And we have members all over the world. We work very, very closely with two other people who live in Germany. That's Beata and Uwe Siegert. Uwe is a physical medium, and he's a very, very good physical medium. And they are also hoping to move to Spain next year.
Right.
So he will eventually be available at the centre when we get the centre for demonstrations of physical mediumship using energy.
Right. Yeah. When you guys go forth with that, do you guys plan to kind of recreate the Scole experiment over again, or are you going to try to apply some new scientific methods to try to maybe do it in a more laboratory kind of style thing, or like what's your goal as far as these new projects?
Yeah, it's going to be very much scientific, and there's going to be more scientists and physicists involved in the whole thing. It will be thoroughly researched as far as we can, and we're going to go as far as possible to make the whole phenomena understandable and understood by the general public. We know, Sandra and I know, that this is our sort of last lap, if you like. And we've been told this is our swan song, so we're going to get this centre started,
Right.
and then I think others will come along that will work with it. But it's going to be very scientific, and you know, some of the phenomena that occurs will be way beyond what we had at Scole.
Sure.
Spirit want to go much further than we ever went,
Right.
and I can tell you what their final aim is: that they will be able to appear to the public quite solid in lighted conditions to absolutely prove beyond any shadow of doubt their identity.
Wow. That's great. And if there's anything that our colleagues over here, myself, you know, the people that I work with, if there's anything that we can do to help that along with you guys, I'd be more than willing to volunteer and help participate in any which way that we can. If we can get the word out for you guys, push it along in any way, you know, on the show, you know, have, you know, multiple guests that people you work with on the show that we can try to help with that. That'd be awesome. I'd be more than willing to do that.
Well, that's good, and I mean, it would be very useful if a few people on your side of the pond can join the Spiritual Science Foundation at a cost of just €20 a year.
Yeah.
And that's paid in through PayPal to email address Torcalero25. That's TORCALERO 25 at yahoo.co.uk. And if they send their name with that, and we need their name, their email address, and whereabouts in the world they are, and we respond immediately with the membership details.
Right.
But there'll be a lot of advantages to members of the foundation once the centre opens.
Yeah, and if you you know, want to share that with me on Messenger, you know, whatever information that you have, I'll pass it along on the Strange Oddities Podcast website. I'll put it on the Facebook page. I'll share that, you know, with everybody.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You said you were trying to raise funds and stuff. Is there any website or any information, a link that people can try to help, you know, pass along to try to, you know, the GoFundMe for what you're doing? Is there any?
There is a GoFundMe site, but we have at the moment managed to get together €33,800.
Oh, nice.
And we need for the whole project to buy the property, which is 6 acres in size,
Nice.
and which actually is a very large sort of built property there. We need 250,000, and we already have nearly 34,000 there. So we're hoping that a large slice of the money we need will come from the Scole movie, which is currently in development and is going to be a big screen movie. We're hoping that will start shooting round about the sort of the end of next year.
Nice.
So we're hoping that a large slice will come out of that.
Yeah,
But
sure.
each and every one of the people that join their membership fees of €20 a year, which is very, very small, goes into that fund.
Yeah, sure. Now, for those who are trying to develop their physical mediumship, modern day paranormal field right now, what would be your advice to those who want to learn? What are some of the things you would tell people where to start? What are some of the things that you would advise them on how to begin their development?
Well, generally speaking, when we had the Scole Experiment, the spirit team themselves fully dictated a 72-page book, which is a basic guide to sort of starting a circle, the development, how it works, and everything you need to sort of really get going. That costs just €10, and we can send the PDF of that to anyone that sort of donates €10 into the fund. And they'll have everything they need to know about starting and developing a physical circle using energy.
Nice. Wow. I'm like, so like my head is like out here. That's all the information that's out there about the Scole Experiment and everything. And, I'm so excited to hear about like the new projects that you have going on.
Yeah.
Other than that location, what are some of the things that you're involved with? Is there anything that you
well, I have two books.
Okay.
One of the first book that I wrote was called In Pursuit of Physical Mediumship. That's available through Amazon.
Nice.
And the second book isn't, because it was self-produced, and it's a very large book, a very heavy book. It's called Witnessing the Impossible, and it's the only book in the world which gives a report on an eyewitness report on every single sitting we had at Scole.
Nice.
That one they have to buy really through emailing me. If they email me for the information, I can send them the information on getting it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'm sure a lot of people are into that. So, what would you tell people in the paranormal on this side of the world as far as advice in communicating with spirit? Because there's a lot of negativity out there in the paranormal. People try to use propagation to communicate. They try to I'm kind of against the whole negative thing to try to get them to respond and whatnot. Me personally, I'm all about intent. I think the intent is the most important thing. And if you have good intent, I think you're going to get more responses with the more respect that you have for what you're communicating with. What would be your advice to people that are trying to, because there are a lot of people who are frustrated with trying to learn how to communicate, whether it be through technology or through their ability.
Yeah. Well,
you know what I mean?
I think first and foremost, I mean, I am not a specialist really in mental mediumship. There's a lot of people that can help, especially mediums that have been sort of doing mental mediumship for many years, who can help in the development in mental mediumship. That's where it's clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. And only the medium is getting to see, to hear, or to sense the spirit person who is present. So I wouldn't really like to sort of give people a lot of advice on that side. My specialist subject is physical mediumship.
Right.
And I'm very happy to personally help and advise on that subject. So if anybody's really into physical mediumship and wants advice on that side, one of the things we do is that if people join the Spiritual Science Foundation, €20 a year, I am here personally to give free advice to any member who wants to know more about development and to try and help wherever I can.
Nice. Well, for those that are listening and our viewers, this is a pre-recorded interview, but we're going to be playing this week on October 1st. We're going to have Mr. Ron Yacovetti helping me co-host that night. We're going to play this interview during that podcast on Thursday night, October 1st. Mr. Foy, I had a wonderful time during this interview. I hope you had a lot of fun during this interview.
Certainly did. And
Yeah.
if you want me to sort of come and talk again, then I'd be happy to do so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if there's anybody else, that you work with that you would like to have a guest on our show, I'd be more than willing to schedule them and, in your future endeavors that you have going on, and, any which way that we can help. I mean, God, feel free to contact me anytime.
Well, certainly, I think our two German friends, who are going to be the other people involved in the centre at the beginning, perhaps they would themselves enjoy speaking on your podcast.
Yeah.
Because Uwe is a superb medium. His English isn't too good, but Beata speaks fantastic English. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, as long as they can speak, I can try to understand them. I gotta brush up on my foreign languages, right? So, but it was great having you. I hope again I was a gracious host here, and we'll have to definitely do it again sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that'll happen. And I don't know. Anything else to say before we close out the interview? Would you like to?
Not really. I mean, I would advise people really to sort of take an interest in trying to find out more about the spirit world. Very, very early on in my experiences, we had a very great person in spirit who came to us and said to us, look, if anybody asks you why you should be interested in looking further into the spirit world, it's like this. If you were going to live and had no option, if you were going to live in a new world, a different place, totally different, and you knew that you had to go there, wouldn't it make sense to actually find out as much as you could about everything that happens there, about the way everything works before you go? And that's the advice we've really tried to follow, and advice that I give to anybody.
Yeah, and for me, just have an open mind, and I think, and again, the intent. If you have the good energy and you use that good energy, with what you have passion for, I think you're gonna get, really good things for yourself in the future if you use that intent with good energy and with the utmost respect. And you're gonna see, a whole different world. Yeah. So, all right. I'm going to go ahead and end this recording. And it was great to have Mr. Robin Foy as our guest this week on the Strange Oddities podcast. And, we're going to continue this episode with talking to Mr. Ron Yacovetti. And actually, he had a big deal with connecting us. And I really appreciate Ron for, helping that out with getting us together and doing this interview. So that's fantastic that he did that. Robin, just stay on with me. We'll say our goodbyes and
Okay.
all right, we're gonna end the recording here.